everybody. Welcome to the Energy Newsbeat podcast. My name's Stu Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group. You know, with COP28 coming out right now, there's a lot of information out there. I don't know about you, but I have a real headache trying to figure out facts, matter, money, lowest kilowatt per hour, what's right, what's wrong. I'll tell you what, I got to be able to reach out to a wonderful individual. His name's Ron Miller, and he is in the energy space. He's got a great program coming up with the School of Mines. It is Renewable Energy 101, online and in person. But we've been talking about what is energy. Thank you, Ron, for stopping by the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here, Stu. Always enjoy your podcasts and learn a lot. Some interesting guests. Hope that trend continues today as well.
Oh, well, thank you, Ron. I'll tell you, the School of Mines is so cool. They're out by your house in Golden.
Yeah, it's got an excellent reputation. Engineering, worked with a number of their graduates for different multinational mining companies, Stu, and they're a great sponsor, partner for this one-day webinar in-person class there at the Colorado School of Mines. So very happy about that.
I am a little bit biased about the School of Mines. Michael Tanner, my co-host, is graduated from there and then got his master's also. So he is, don't tell anybody, but he's a freak. I mean, he is one of the coolest freaks out there. Understanding just about everything around energy, between the geology of oil and gas and finances, and the School of Mines should be just very proud of the students that they do produce. So hats off for having them as a sponsor. But let's backtrack just here a little bit. Mm-hmm. When we're sitting here, we kind of wonder about the information. Education with facts matter. I don't know about you, but when I was going to school, they hit us with a stick, and if the facts mattered, that seems like that's gone away. But how, when you got to this point of even having this webinar, how did you get to the point of when you're saying, what is the webinar and what kind of material are you putting in there?
Well, I'll tell you, I have a little background. I've been in the energy sector my entire career, a long career, and very enjoyable for me, and it's my passion. But I think a lot of the information that we're getting from multiple sources, may or may not be fully factual, and sometimes the worst information is a half-truth, not telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, to kind of quote a legal term that we're all familiar with. And I think that's the one thing. I write an energy article on LinkedIn every month. About 3/4 of them are picked up on energycentral.com. But I really believe in sharing information from my career from different oil and gas, renewables, mining, utilities, to really help to educate, and I don't mean that in a dismissive manner, but to help help people understand some of the dynamics and the fundamentals of energy, so we can, with that information, that we can begin making not only better energy decisions, but things that take a lot of different criteria, meaning cost, reliability,
you bet,
and emissions. All those three areas in making that decision, not just one preferentially.
Well, when we sit back and we kind of think, there's such a diverse opinions. Oil and gas, bad. Fossil fuels, bad. But they're 80% of the energy of the world. Nuclear's bad, but it provides the most stable base load out there. Wind and solar have always been getting cheaper. How do you talk, or how do you tee up your normal discussion? Let's say you're on an elevator and somebody says, I like me some cheap energy. I think wind and solar are great. How would you respond to somebody just saying wind and solar is the cheapest on the planet?
Stu, I'll tell you, there's so many graphs that you can look at, and they have facts, but they show the levelized cost of energy. And a number of entities have put those out, and they're all factual for the production cost of wind, solar, nuclear, gas, coal at all. And that's really, that word production is a real key name or word, because if everyone lived by a utility scale, 100 megawatt and up, solar, wind farm,
right,
where the electricity comes directly to their house, yes, it is the cheapest. But getting a wind farm that's out in the boonies, a lot of land, same thing with solar, a lot less land, into urban areas where the majority of the U.S. population lives. It involves transmission and reliability issues. When you look at production costs, which are low for solar and wind, but then you look at areas, countries, and states that have high renewable energy penetration, and you look at, as renewable energy penetration increases, does the retail price that the consumer pays, whether it be at your home, your business, or your industry, does it also drop by 90% since 2000? The answer is emphatically no, it's gone the other way because of high capital expenditures for transmission that's not always used at 100% capacity factor. So I think that's some of the interesting things that we look at is, well, it's great there at that site. Or if you have solar on your roof, it's directly going to the demand. No transmission, no capital costs, maybe 100 feet of wire, copper wire.
Right.
A lot different than a 100 or 200 megawatt solar plant or wind farm out in Wyoming, Kansas, the eastern plains of Colorado, etc. So I think that's one element people need to.
Well, you bring up a lot of great points, Ron. But let me ask this, because New York and California are twice the expense of Texas's electrical to its consumers.
Right.
And so we spent over $3.5 billion in Texas to bring the wind farm energy to the eastern part of the state. But we have nuclear, we have natural gas, we have wind. We're going to be the largest solar, and it's blending everything together. It seems to work okay if you blend everything together and not plan on just one wind or solar only. Is that a fair statement, or is that?
No, I think you bring up a really good point in that it's not energy either or. Unless we dramatically reduce our energy consumption, and for the last only like probably 300 years, it's gone up. We need all of the above. Like the AB, the multiple choice test, E, all of the above.
Right.
And I like to use the analogy for transmission. Say you have a solar or wind farm connecting to the grid versus a natural gas plant. That's base load, not a peaker, base load.
Right.
Build that transmission line, and just for a minute, assume that the transmission line is like an airplane, commercial aircraft.
Right.
Two aircraft. One handles solar and wind, another one services the gas plant. How many airlines make money when the capacity factor or the amount of passengers on the plane is about 90 to 95% versus the other plane that's only got 25 to 35%, which is the renewables, because they're intermittent solar, variable wind. And I'm not knocking solar or wind. I'm just saying the reality is you've got for 16 hours of the day, perhaps for solar, you've got a grossly underutilized asset that you've paid a lot of money to build. And I think that's the one thing when you look at it. spend as much money as you want. I don't care if electricity goes to 30, 50, 60 cents a kilowatt hour. If that's the mindset and the voting population's idea of what's right, that's fine. We live in a republic. So, but I think people will, at some point, see prices increasing, and as much as they want to do the right thing, whatever right thing to a lot of people might be, I think that almighty wallet issue comes up and raises its ugly face. A lot of times we've seen it in reality, that ugly face. So I don't want to pay that much money. What's the alternative?
Right. But, and we sit back and we kind of go, I did a bunch of studies. I'm trying to get to the bottom of, the wind, the life expectancy or the fiscal responsibility of a wind farm is 0 without tax subsidies. I mean, from day one, they're not fiscally responsible. And we've seen Ørsted lose billions. We've seen, the wind farms not being bid on the East Coast now. Yes. And so we're losing those kind of things. And then when you see everybody says they're carbon neutral and they're free, they don't become carbon neutral until 10 years. And the maintenance numbers now, Ron, that I put together is after 8 years with tax subsidies, the tax subsidies typically will run out into that 8-year range. Mm-hmm. After that point, they are no longer fiscally capable of being sustained because the maintenance has kicked in at this time, and they cannot be sustained without rates increasing to the ratepayers. So if now you've got a real problem, then reclamation, that's an OSU way to talk. Reclamation. I think the School of Mines would have a better way of teaching their students how to talk. But the reclamation of a wind farm is over $380,000 just to get rid of the concrete on one pad. I mean, it's just crazy when the wind farms are failing, and they're going to be walked away from. And that, to me, is the sad part about the ESG and the energy side is nobody's pricing in the reclamation of the wind farms when they're done after 10 years.
Yeah, I tell you, Stu, you bring up a couple of really great points. One is the environmental, the emissions of 1,500 tons of concrete, buku's amount of steel, tons of steel. When you look at what's the carbon footprint of those materials and plastics for the wind turbine blades, excuse me, when you look at that, it starts out like a capital project. You're in the hole when you invest, negative. It takes time to get up to 0 before you start getting much more of the benefit that you want. The other thing, in part of this Renewable Energy 101 course, I actually looked at two, a solar plant and a wind farm, 100 megawatts, with the investment tax credit for solar and the accelerated depreciation. 6 years, you depreciate 85% of the capex. And it's similar for a wind farm, production tax credit, which is 2.6 cents per kilowatt hour, and they get the accelerated depreciation. Nice. When you look at both those types of farms with the federal tax benefits and without, in the first 5 years, your rate of return with all these benefits is twice the return if it had no incentive. So without the tax credits, you'll be having a much lower rate of return on that project. So it really makes it, which brings up another point that I'll just throw out, gasoline to a fire. If solar and wind are the lowest cost production costs of energy, why do we subsidize through production tax credit, investment tax credit, accelerated depreciation, the lowest price? Usually when things are high priced, but society determines we need to do this. Let's incent. Let's get the economies of scale. Instead of 1 gigawatt, we want 10 gigawatts. And
Right.
at the 10 gigawatts, the price curve will go. When it's the lowest price, what is the U.S. taxpayer getting for that tax benefit extended to solar and wind developers? And if the tax law gives a benefit, it's legal. But I'm just questioning, at what point do we give money that is just making developers, very wealthy?
Right.
They may not have done it had that generous tax benefit been extended to them. And that's the question.
That's a big question.
As a taxpayer, as a consumer paying my monthly bills, I've got to ask those questions, because I don't think people are really looking at it and saying, what bang are we getting for our dollar? Okay.
Well, you brought up some excellent points while we were chit-chatting beforehand, and it's kind of like when we sit back and look at the dollar, what's the cost per dollar or the per kilowatt hour, and who's paying for it sitting there idle. And as you go through and you say, how are they the cost per energy? Could you describe how it's not fairly being calculated out in there, if that makes sense?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you one example, Stu, is in 2022, California had 2.4 million megawatt hours curtailed, because when the energy is available to be produced, and I'm saying mainly solar, but there's some wind, guess what? There's not demand. And electricity, you have to match solar, or match supply and demand every second of every day of every month. So when you don't have demand, there's no place for it to go unless you have energy storage facilities.
Right.
So you have to tell that solar and wind developer, turn your machines off, but there's no home for it. So the point is, for 2.4 million megawatt hours last year, when you look at a taxpayer saying, hey, for that farm that we gave you ITC, accelerated depreciation, over 20 years, that comes to about a 2 cents per kilowatt hour subsidy that federal taxpayers are paying. But guess what? We didn't get 2.4 million megawatt hours. So we're paying for something up front that we're not getting as a consumer. And I think that gets, that cost of curtailment to the federal taxpayers is about $48 million last year for California alone. So I think, once again, it's all about, are you getting value? Who questions whether, not what solar and wind is good about emissions? It is. They're lower than coal, not as good as nuclear. But when you look at, hey, if you're going to make that expenditure, I want that plane to be full all the time with passengers that pay the freight, right? Rather than, well, we're just going to curtail it, and I'm sorry you're losing money, federal taxpayer, but that's just the way things are. I question whether that's really a good model for our energy policy, and from a consumer and an environmental standpoint.
That just really kind of explained it out a lot better than I did. And when we sit back and take a look at the cost per kilowatt hour, the only way to really get humanity elevated out of poverty is through energy. And Alex Epstein does a great job, talking about work and the power and how much does it cost to get energy done, so we don't have to plant the crops or go walk 2 miles to get the water and those things. That is what energy should be used for, is elevating people out of poverty. So with the least impact on the environment, that to me is critical. But boy, King Coal is coming back big time, and it's because of the world needing all forms of energy. Boy, China has got 400 coal plants on the map. So the School of Mines may be sending a bunch of guys over to China. I'm, I'm kidding, but
it's interesting. Last decade, the decade of 2010, the United States and the EU retired 49,200 megawatts of coal-fired plants.
wow.
I think this next number will have been inflated, but in this decade, 2020, China is building 250,000 megawatts, 5 times, of new coal.
Yep.
And I think that number has gone north since that statistic was out there. So, once again, it's a little bit of an irony is that coal plant built in China is helping to build wind farms and solar plants and solar panels so that the West can have these things and feel good that we're solving our climate crisis, all the while China is just churning out. And if there was a way in God's green earth to say all the emissions from any country that is really just putting it out, and the United States is the second largest emitter, for it to stay in its own airspace. But I don't think that's the way the world, the globe works with weather. I think their pollution will eventually be our pollution. So.
Well, you bring up I think we need to draw a map, and I'll get my a crayon out here, because I got the way I think, I've got about 15 different maps going on in my head right now.
Yeah.
And the coal you just nailed it, and that is, we are buying through tax credits, and the consumers are paying higher kilowatt per hour for solar and wind, because the battery is right now, if you're putting storage on a farm, I believe it's $500 per kilowatt hour or something, and it needs to be down into that 50 range before that it's really affordable without subsidies. So you're 500 versus the 50. We're subsidizing all of this with trillions of dollars. We're shipping the orders over to China for them to make the gear. The gear's being shipped over back to the United States for us to install, to pay higher, and then they're taking the profits and putting low-cost coal plants in so they can pollute. Their pollution has gone up. Their CO2 emissions has gone up over 220% in the last few years. Ours has actually gone down 22% because of the elimination of the natural gas, the elimination of the coal plants and turning those to natural gas. That was from the EIA last year, said that was the only reason that we did was because of the transition to natural gas. This year, the EIA put out another report and said it may have. They didn't want to give natural gas any credit at all. So, Ron, you bring up a paradigm that we really need to have our graphics team work on, because this little hamster wheel that we are now on is terrible.
It really is. You mentioned the natural gas. One of my articles of how natural gas fracking in the U.S. has reduced emissions, CO2 emissions. It's out there on my LinkedIn site. I've spoken at AEE, Association of Energy Engineers, world conferences. It's been published in their journal. But this big miracle, I'll say, of technology, and once again, I'll be fair. If there's breakthroughs in solar, wind, geothermal, or oil and gas, you have to recognize all of them. But the fact that since 2008, when you look at the emissions of the United States in the energy sector, exactly what you said, replacing more polluting coal with not perfectly clean natural gas, but much more of an improvement. It's been a dramatic shift in our emissions, but also when you look at the rate of electricity prices from 1990 to 2008 2008 to 2022.
Yep.
The prior is very steep, 2.3% per year increase. Since 2008, a lot more natural gas. It's abundant. It's cheaper. It's a plateau, albeit about 0.5%. So since 2008, being the analytical engineering guy that I am, I calculated the amount of energy, electricity cost savings for the American consumer is about 547 billion with a B. So not only are we lowering our emissions, the consumer is getting a less emitting, cheaper electricity solely due, partially renewable energy. You could say there's a part, and there is, but when you look at the lion's share of energy in the United States, 39.2% is natural gas.
Wow.
So big change for the wallets of American consumers, in addition to the improvement in our emissions performance. So a two-edged sword, cost and emissions, got to look at both of them, not just one in a vacuum. So
you bet. Wow. Now, boy, you meant, wow. I'm sitting here going, that was good. I was like, man, I wish I thought of that. But I pulled up your article here, and I had read it before, but I'll have links in the show notes. So it's funny that you said that, and I'm like, I've read, yes. So well done on that article. I'll make sure that that's in the show notes.
So just to interject one thing, the trouble I see is, even though this was going on, it's an inconvenient truth. You'll never see that in the news broadcasts, even though it's a lot of value, both emissions and dollars to the consumers. Why isn't that fact on the news, that we are acknowledging this achievement? I think it's a bit biased that they don't say, oh, great deal on solar, a lot more generation than coal plants now.
Right.
And to be even-handed, did you also know this fracking, whichever your opinion, it does have benefits, and here they are. So
I love the article. I also think that solar has more legs than wind. Wind is now falling apart and falling off of the scale because of the expense. I believe that solar still's got a lot more play for investors taking a look at, where am I going to make my money? Because the energy investing space has been complicated, Ron, with Bill Gates coming out just recently and saying that, climate change is not going to kill us. Okay. And then you have BlackRock, Larry Fink coming out and saying our funds are okay to invest in oil and gas for ESG. Our ESG investors are doing it. So you have two gigantic hypocrisy stories going on right here. And I still feel that solar is going to be easier to find investors in when they're taking a look, getting their money back. I don't know. What are your thoughts on, because it's tough to get the money back on wind. It seems like it's going to be easier on solar. I don't have any data to say that. That's a feeling that I have right now.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. Solar is, I guess, less moving parts, even though you have the single axis tracking. It tracks from east to west to catch the early morning sun. It's facing east. In the afternoon, it's facing west. That, as far as moving parts, it's not like a wind turbine that's the blades turning way up there 300 feet or more above the ground. I think the only concern, I'll say concern with solar is I look at the California duck curve, where they have this rush of solar from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. in rough terms. Obviously, different times of the year, it's a little bit different, but it's a huge influx of solar energy to the grid, which satisfies the demand at 8 to 4.
Right.
But like most Americans, we have a life from 4 p.m. to 8 a.m. that requires energy, especially if you're in a cold climate like the Dakotas
or trying to charge an EV.
Yeah, yes. So I think that part, that dynamic of how do you address, that's one of the topics in my webinar is the duck curve. What it does, what it doesn't do. Is this a concern? Should we be looking to find alternatives that we could accept low emissions energy, but not say, well, it's 5 o'clock, go build a fire out in the backyard to cook our meal tonight because we don't have electricity. That's going to be a concern I think people need to be aware of, and that's part of the reason for this course, Stu, to make sure people are aware of all the facts that may interfere with their lifestyle in the future. So,
facts matter. Facts and physics.
Yes. It's so true.
I cannot wait to hear more about this thing that you have, the Renewable Energy 101. This is going to be a big deal, and I really want to help get the word out on this because your story needs to get out there and sit back and evaluate the right numbers. I mean, it's just we want all types of energy. I just don't want to print money. Fiscally, the world cannot print anymore. I just think that it's a mistake, and that we need to get the lowest cost kilowatt per hour to everyone on the planet, even through the disproportionately impacted communities, because energy poverty is real. And it just breaks my heart that the financial systems are not geared up to deliver the lower cost kilowatt per hour. You got to look at the whole grid. And I'll tell you what, Ron, I would not want to be a balancing authority. Can you imagine sitting there with those guys going, I need 500 watts over here. I need 200 watts, and I need you to spin up. I need you to stand down. I guarantee you, I'd be like in the corner drinking rather than having to fire up and tell, hey, you're on standby over here. Yeah. That's a tough job balancing the grid. It's not just, plug it into the wall and think that you're going to have energy come out. There's a machine behind that.
I tell you, Stuart, I used to work over in Ghana, West Africa, in mining in there, and they have, they used to have outages. They call them load shedding, where your facility gets nixed for energy 1 day out of every 3. Sometimes you don't know when that 1 day might be, and right. It really makes you think. We live in a privileged society in the U.S. where when I turn the switch on, I don't have to think, well, is the light going to come on? Is the pump going to work? Is the air conditioner? We have very good reliability. But over other countries, and Ghana has improved dramatically since those times, that's a real concern. And the problem with a grid not working that's got even 1% renewables is the alternative for it not working is in 17 seconds, the emergency diesel genset kicks on for those lucky people at a hotel or a business that they have it at their command. It's more polluting than getting from a better natural gas, solar, wind from the grid. So having a grid that works, that's reliable, is really better for the overall energy / emissions / cost equation. We just got to get the word out that we don't want all these other gen sets at people's homes, wherever you live in the world. It's not real efficient, and it's not real, not real green. It really isn't.
Yeah, I've got multiple places and generators at each, and because you have to be able to survive the FE. Let me ask this, in closing up here in just in a few minutes. The FERC just put out and said we're going to have a lot of blackouts, potential of a lot of blackouts now because of the grid's problems and everything else. Did you see that report come out?
I have not, and I'll tell you, I've obviously been working on this webinar, my slide deck. But I tell you, I think the more, and I'm not knocking renewables. I think with any situation, you solve what can make it work, and you mitigate the risk rather than just accept it. I don't like blackouts. What do? We put more hydro pump storage, more battery, more whatever, load shifting, time of use rates, whatever we have to do. But I think not having power that we're in electricity in our country, we have been so spoiled by not only cheap electricity, but reliable electricity. And I don't think people want to go back to where we were in the 1920s or earlier, where it was not that reliable, or or people do not have access. So it gets to be a social issue too, like you say, not access. You're out gathering wood. Some countries burning dung for
exactly
not very healthy for your respiratory system at all. So
no.
Anyway, long answer to a short question, Stu.
Unfortunately, between the geopolitical, the financial, and the energy types, everybody has, it seems like, Ron, everybody's siloed into their little specialities. And so it's kind of nice to have the broader discussions, because it is fiscal, it is geopolitical, it is farming. It is, when you start putting all this stuff together, the farms use more energy than just about anybody else. But if they do all of this, then they do. It's a head game. This is a big chess match just to get the world out of poverty.
Yeah, I think one problem that we have, it's like your key word is siloed, and I think more of what we need is a more open discussion,
right,
with openness to different ideas to calibrate. I use a quote in all of my articles, and I don't have it in front of me, but basically it says it's better to have no resolution with a lot of discussion rather than having a resolution that has no discussion, because you're not letting your peer challenge you to say, hey, Ron, I disagree with this area. Where's your proof? I don't see it this way. I have found in my professional life, letting a colleague look at a presentation, they can kind of stress test it and say, hey, I think it's weak. We're not doing that in a lot of areas with our energy strategy. We're not letting dissenting votes, dissenting opinions, dissenting scientific analysis come into the fray and say, hey, I think there's a better product out there.
Right.
We have to find ways to be open. It reminds me of an old African proverb: if you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, find a partner. And we're not doing the partnering side of the coin. To your point about getting more people aware, allow dissenting votes, dissenting conversations. That's the only way we progress as a society on anything: medicine, engineering, energy, education, at all. So.
Wow. Now, Ron, how do people find you? I'm going to have your LinkedIn account in the show notes.
Okay.
And so is there anything else that people need to know about you, or how to get a hold of you?
If they want to link in, it's Ron Miller, capital P, capital E, professional engineer, and you'll find me. And I would love to have people link in, look at my energy articles. Always open for comment. That's one thing I've learned. One of the things I present not only to mining and energy conferences, but AEE chapters and universities. And some of the very best questions I've had have been from students that have, I'll say, not been dulled by 30 years in corporate America. This is the way you have to think. And they're very, very sharp, but they're also, how do you deal with this? Well, no one's ever asked that question. That's the kind of question that you want to get if you're looking for continuous improvement. A little bit of humility, but yeah, I would encourage.
I loved having you on, and I love your attitude. Education and open conversation is the most critical way to get poverty solved in the world.
Yes.
I think it's the only way we're going to survive. If not, I'm going to sign up for Elon's flight to Mars. I think that ought to be a hoot. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Ron, and all your contact info will be in the show notes. And for the Energy Newsbeat team, my name's Stu Turley.